Hello and welcome again. Today I'd like to talk about a controversial god. He's a god of chaos, humor, mischief, and deception. I am talking about the trickster god himself, Loki. There is so much information about Loki, so much to unpack that I honestly wasn't sure where to even start. I guess one thing I will say right off the bat, for those of you just starting to learn about Loki for the first time from a Norse pagan standpoint, I would like you to try and forget the image of Loki that Marvel has given us. He is not Thor's brother, and he is not the clear-cut evil villain as portrayed. But he does have an origin story. So let's begin. Loki is a descendant of two of the first frost giants, Farboti and Laufey. He was accepted by the Aesir gods because of his cunning, his wit, and extreme intelligence. His first known wife is Angrboda, a Jotun. With her, he fathers three children, Jormungandr, the world serpent, Hel, the ruler of Helheim, who is half dead and half alive, and is responsible for receiving those who die of sickness and old age, and, of course, Fenrir, the great wolf. Based off this, we can already tell that Loki is a complex figure. After all, Jormungandr is a feared serpent and an enemy of Thor, protector of Midgard. Hel is not a menacing figure per se, but she is one of the personifications of death, and that's not a very light subject. And then there is Fenrir, the enormous wolf who is destined to kill Odin during Ragnarok. And these are children of Loki, a giant accepted into the Aesir pantheon and blood brother of Odin. I'll get to that at a later time. So our first introduction to Loki is shaky, and after all, he is the god of mischief and chaos, and we now learn he has fathered these controversial children, so it's easy to therefore pass judgment on him. But when we dive into his deeper stories, one could say that he is merely a complex deity who has flaws but is willing to make things right. So for those who don't know, Sif is the beloved wife of Thor. The golden blonde color of her hair is admired throughout Asgard and brings a smile to everyone's face when she's seen. Well, one night, Loki, being a prankster, decides, wouldn't it be hilarious if I shaved Sif's head while she sleeps? And he does exactly that. Thor wakes up to see his beautiful wife completely bald. She is freaking out, and Thor immediately thinks of Loki as the culprit. Thor finds Loki, and he admits that he did it as a prank. The extremely unfunny part, however, is that Sif's hair will not grow back. Thor says, "You're hilarious, Loki. Well played. You really got us. It's a real knee slapper. You say that her hair won't grow back. Well, that's too bad for you, because if you do not find a way to get her hair back and make this right, I will break every single bone in your body. And when you're healed, I will break them all over again and again and again." Get the picture? Needless to say, Loki promises to get her hair back, and even takes it a step further, because Thor is not the only one angry about this. Again, her hair cheered everyone up, so Loki promises, in addition, he will procure great gifts for all of the gods. So Loki travels to Svartalfheim, the realm of the Dark Elves, aka the Dwarves. Dwarves are famously known for their ability to forge top-notch items. He first goes to the three sons of Ivaldi and explains the situation. They make for Sif a head of hair that is even more beautiful than ever. Golden locks that will permanently attach to her and are the embodiment of the best of wheat fields in the Nine Realms. They say that when you see a great wheat field, it's like Sif's hair. They also create a spear for Odin called Gungnir, which would never miss its mark, and that came in handy for Odin because, he only has one eye. And for Freyr, they make a ship. This ship is massive, but it can be shrunken and folded like a piece of paper for easy transportation across lands. It could also sail through the sky like an airplane, which is pretty cool. It was a very, very impressive ship. In Loki's mind, he is so desperate to win back the gods' favor that he feels the need to get even better gifts. So he finds the dwarf brothers, Brock and Eitri. He explains the situation, but also informs them that the sons of Vivaldi have already made extravagant gifts and eggs them on, basically saying, I bet you can't make better gifts. If Brock and Eitri can make better gifts, they will be greatly rewarded by the gods and be in the gods' favor. They agree, however, they add one stipulation. If they win, they will get to cut off Loki's head. So I guess Loki already has a reputation, even amongst dwarves, of being kind of an asshole. So Loki agrees, but he tries to make sure that their gifts are not better than the others. After all, his head is on the line. So Eitri and Brock forge a boar with golden bristles for Freyr's chariot. It was faster than any horse, and the golden bristles would light his way at night. Then they made an arm ring for Odin called Draupnir, which would drip 8 identical arm rings every 9 nights. With the extra arm rings, he could either gift them to others or sell them to boost his own wealth, or the wealth of Asgard. And then they start to work on a gift for Thor. They start forging Thor's gift with Eitri, pounding the hot steel, while Brock works the bellows. He informs Brock that if the airflow of the bellows is not perfectly timed, it will compromise the quality of the final product. So Loki hears this, and he shapeshifts into a fly. As Brock is working the bellows, Loki, in fly form, begins flying around Brock and agitates him as much as possible. We can all relate to being annoyed by a fly while we're trying to work. Our instinct is to swat it away. Well, Loki is unrelenting and even starts biting at Brock's hands and face. Brock is successfully able to ignore the fly, which he doesn't know is Loki, and they're almost done forging. This is when Loki, as an act of desperation, starts biting Brock's eyelids. Brock is now blinded by his own blood, but still trying to work the bellows. He finally cracks and tries his best to simultaneously swat the fly away, wipe the blood from his face and eyes, and continue to work the bellows without skipping a beat. Eitri emerges shortly after and says, well, it's finished, but there was a hiccup with the airflow at the end, and it's not as perfect as we were hoping for. What the crap is your problem, Brock? You had one job. Brock just stares at him, and with his face covered in blood, and shoot up eyelids. Like, really? Really? So the gods are given their gifts, and they are very satisfied. Then at the end of Brock and Eitri's presentation, they unveil a hammer. This hammer is called Mjolnir, and it is meant for Thor. He'll be able to slay giants and trolls much easier with this, rather than relying on only his brute strength. It will kill anything that strikes. If he throws it, it will hit the intended target without missing, and no matter how far the target is away, it will always return to him. We have to be honest, though, during the forging process, there was a mishap with the bellows. As a result, the handle of the hammer is much shorter than it should be. So after saying this, Thor inspects the hammer, and a big grin comes across his face. He says, no, this is actually perfect. The smaller handle will actually make it easier for me to throw as needed. Asgard and Midgard will now be even better protected with this hammer in my arsenal. Well, Brock and Eitri won. Therefore, it's time to collect Loki's head. The gods are too busy admiring their gifts to notice this deal, and Thor notices it, but he is too mesmerized by Mjolnir to care what happens to Loki. Loki, being quick-witted, exclaims that his neck cannot be touched because he only promised his head. Well, you can't decapitate someone without cutting their neck. So Loki outsmarted them there. So instead, they sew his mouth shut. No idea how long that lasts for, because that's the end of the story, but Loki clearly speaks again in later stories. But Loki took a bad situation there and turned it into a positive for the gods. In the saga of Thrymskviða, this story is a favorite of many Norse pagans, and I also find it extremely entertaining. So Thor wakes up one morning to find that his hammer, Mjolnir, is missing. This is a big deal. Thor's hammer is what keeps the frost giants and trolls at bay. And after all, it's a magical weapon. It kills anyone it strikes instantly, has the ability to return to Thor after his throne. Jotuns fear Thor, but without his hammer, he is much easier to fight. The first person that Thor thinks of is Loki. He either is the one who took the hammer, or he can help him find it. And this actually speaks volumes about Loki. He has this reputation of being a villain, trickster god, causing nothing but mischief and mayhem. However, in this example, Thor thinks of Loki's wisdom and cunning before any of the other gods, even Odin, being the wisest of the gods. He goes to Loki instead. Thor tells Loki about his hammer. Loki, realizing how serious of a situation this is, tells Thor that he will indeed find out where the hammer is. Loki goes then to Freya. In addition to her 2 cats that pull her on her chariot, she also has a special cloak made out of falcon feathers. And it gives anyone who wears it the ability to fly to the other realms. Loki asks to borrow the cloak, and she says, absolutely not. I don't lend this to anyone, and you're nuts if you think I'd let you of all people borrow it. Loki pauses and says, Mjolnir's missing. Freya looks at him and says, take the cloak. Loki travels to Jotunheim in falcon form, and he's circling around, and he sees a Jotun sitting on top of a burial mound. It is the ugliest ogre of a Jotun he has ever seen. He lands next to him, and the Jotun says, oh, hey, Loki, I am called Thrym. What is the latest in Asgard these days? Loki immediately becomes suspicious, and he says, I'm looking for Thor's hammer. It's been stolen. Would you know anything about that? And Thrym says, I might. What kind of reward would you give if someone like me knew where the hammer was? Loki says, well, we have lots of treasures in Asgard. Thrym cuts him off and says, oh, how's Freya doing? Is she really as beautiful in person as they say she is? Loki nods slowly, says, she is considered the most beautiful in all the 9 realms, yes. Thrym says, well, let's just say, hypothetically, if I knew where the hammer was, and I could promise to give it back, my price would be Freya's hand in marriage. Loki says, well, I would have to consult with the other gods, and Thrym cuts him off and says, 8 days. 8 days. My wedding to Freya will be in 8 days. No Freya, no hammer. So Loki returns to Asgard, and Thor's anxiously awaiting. He tells Thor and the other gods what happened. They go to Freya's hall to return her cloak, and she says, so did you find out who stole the hammer? Loki says, yes, a Jotun named Thrym. Freya makes a face and says, I know of him. He's a repulsive creature. What does he want for it? And Loki just kind of stares at Freya for a bit, and Freya's expression turns to genuine concern. Loki says, you, Freya, he wants you. In exchange for your hand in marriage, he will give Mjolnir back. Freya rolls her eyes sarcastically, but then looks back at Loki, whose demeanor is very serious. Thor steps in and says, Freya, this is Mjolnir we're talking about, the weapon I use to keep Asgard safe. This needs to happen. Freya flat out refuses and is insulted that they think she would even entertain the idea. So all of the gods assemble and try to come up with a game plan. After every bad idea is shot down, Heimdall speaks up and says, "This is going to sound insane, but it might actually work." Thor is the only one who can handle Mjolnir to use as a weapon. So whatever we do, he needs to be there. We can't just send him in as is. We need to be sneaky about it. We don't know where the hammer is, and it won't be revealed until Thrym, his bride-to-be, sees it. So Thor, you dress in a full wedding gown and pretend to be Freya until the hammer is found. Thor absolutely refuses. He's an enormous man. He won't shave his beard, and he certainly will not cross-dress as a woman. So Odin steps in and says, "Thor, my son, Heimdall's plan will work, and it's probably our best shot." Loki even agrees to shapeshift into a woman and pretend to be his bridesmaid. So Thor is finally convinced of the plan. 8 days later, Thor, dressed as Freya, and Loki in woman form arrive at the wedding hall in Jotunheim. As they're approaching, Loki tells Thor to just keep quiet, let him do all the talking. Thrym is delighted to see his bride-to-be. Thor has a veil over his face, and despite his large shape, no one questions it yet. Thrym asks to see her face, and Loki replies that Freya's face must be covered until they are officially married. Thrym looks at Freya's, quote-unquote, Freya's veiled face and can see burning eyes, almost like fire, through the cloth. And Loki reassures him, that Freya has been so excited and she's just had such a burning passion for Thrym that she hasn't slept at all, so her eyes are very weary. And Thrym buys it. Thrym claps his hands, and out comes Jotun servants with food and drink. Everyone is seated. Loki cleverly sits between Thor and Thrym, so that as to not blow their cover, but he claims, it's just a tradition of Asgard, when in reality he was preventing Thor's cover from being blown by, he can probably tell if he's sitting right next to him. So the feast begins, and Thor just goes to town on everything. He is wolfing down food like there's no tomorrow. People begin to notice this, and Loki is wide-eyed, kicking him under the table, whispering to Thor, "Hey, what are you doing, man? Pull yourself together." Thor ignores him and continues to feast. By the way, this is one of the main stories that gives people a visual of Thor being built more like a brick shithouse. Not the perfectly chiseled image we get from Hollywood. The video game God of War Ragnarok shows him as the quite opposite, a big burly man with a huge gut and man boobs. I personally picture Thor as in between those two images, a very large muscular man, but not the type who counts calories in order to maintain a perfect six-pack. But I digress. By the end of the feast, Thor has devoured an entire ox, 8 salmon, puts the entire fish in his mouth and pulls out the bare skeleton, like in cartoons. He's eaten several trays of pastries and 3 casks of mead he has drank. Pan over to Loki in woman form, just sitting there, come on, dude, you're killing me here. Thrym leans over and says, "Wow, I've never seen a woman eat like that." And Loki reassures him, saying, pay no attention. Freya is Freya is a slender woman, but she was just so nervous about marrying you that she didn't eat for all 8 of these past days, and she is ravenous today. And Thrym again buys it. So then Thrym claps his hands and says, "All right, now it's time to present the beautiful Freya with her wedding gift. I have gone great lengths to obtain it." And then several Jotuns start dragging a chest out, and they're struggling to do so. It's finally placed in front of the head table, and they open it. They struggle to pull out its content, but they're able to place it in front of Thor, aka Freya. And it's Mjolnir. Thor's eyes open wide, and then they squint in anger. Thrym says, "Well, my love, this is a symbol of our undying love, and this is what I would do to be with you. What do you think? Thor stands up, picks up the hammer, and says, I think that it was a very, very bad idea to steal my hammer. Rips off his veil. Thrym gets a face full of Mjolnir, courtesy of Thor. Thor then rips off the dress, proceeds to slaughter every single Jotun in the hall. Loki's hiding under the table this whole time, listening to the sounds of shrieks and bashing of the hammer. And when it gets quiet, he emerges, and he's back in Loki form. He looks around, sees the carnage, and Thor just covered in blood and guts. He's cleaning off Mjolnir. He looks at Loki and he says, all right, let's go home. So in this story, unlike the others, Loki isn't doing a good deed to make up for something bad he did. He's doing it because it's the right thing to do. He knows that without the hammer in Thor's possession, Asgard would be doomed. This is very contrary to the evil villain he is commonly known as, which makes me wonder how much of Loki's portrayals in the Eddas are true, and which ones have a heavily Christian influence. Loki doesn't only locate the hammer, he goes with Thor on a very risky and dangerous mission to get it back. He was not obligated to do so, and one of the reasons why I love this story is that it shines light on Thor's friendship with Loki. That friendship definitely has some back and forth roller coaster moments. And in another saga, Gylfaginning from the Prose, Odin disguised himself as a man named Third and retells a story of Thor and Loki spending a night in Midgard. They stay with a peasant family, and Thor offers up his goats to eat for the night. He explains that they can eat the meat, but they are not to break any of the goat's bones. Thialfi, one of the children, does decide to break one of the goat's legs and eats the bone marrow. Not very many people would agree with this, but there is a theory that Loki is the one who convinces Thialfi to break the bone despite Thor's warning.
You eat bone marrow?
Through the chain on the Fenrir.
Bone marrow.
Yes.
What's it do?
Gives you strength. A lot of strength.
But Thor said...
Thor says a lot. A goat has a lot of bones. Do you think anyone's gonna miss a single one?
I guess not.
That's right.
The wolf demanded we put an arm in his mouth. So Tyr stuck his arm in the jaw of the beast. And when we tightened the chain, bit off his arm.
Perhaps you're scared.
No.
Today, the Fenrir wolf is chained with Gleipnir in a cave.
It shows Loki isn't the pure evil villain. He has a back and forth relationship, and all relationships and friendships have their moments after all. In my previous episode, I talked about the death of Balder, the preamble to Ragnarok. Now, the different versions of the story where one paints Loki as the villain and the other by Saxo Grammaticus where Loki has little to no involvement might indicate that when these sagas were written down over 100 years after the Viking Age, perhaps the Christian influence might have tried to villainize Loki and falsely make him the Lucifer of Norse mythology, when in reality he may have just been a god with faults just like the rest of the Norse pantheon. So this far I have told some stories about Loki which doesn't make him a villain, just a complicated deity. As you can already tell, there's so much info about him and so much more that I would like to tell. I would rather tell the rest of Loki's story in a sequel episode so that I'm not overloading information in just one episode. In the next episode about Loki, I'll talk about his rift with the gods, the story of him dissing the gods in a drunken rant at a party, and when the gods finally have had enough of his antics. Until then, thank you for watching, and remember, ek gang, that ri, beim skom, ek falta. See you next time.